Welcome to North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated's Lessons of Vietnam show. My name is Bill Dixon. My co-host, Mr. Bob Matthews, and I are here tonight to give you a replay, first time on here, but the replay of a symposium we did with the North Carolina Museum of History. It's the story of American POWs as well as the South Vietnamese military's re-education camps. But Bob, before we get started, we had a busy May. We spoke to a lot of schools and so forth. Bring us up a little bit about was it 5 schools within a week and a half or something like that?
Well, Bill, I think we spoke to over 500 students. We had a special school at North Duplin High School, the home of Joseph Hargrove.
Mm-hmm. Joseph Hargrove was the Marine who was one of the 3 Marines left behind during the Battle of Mayaguez. I'm getting better. I listened the other 2 years, and I'll be able to say that ship, and who's still missing. It was the day we were there speaking in his home high school.
Yes.
It was his birthday, and also the day that he went missing.
It was such an honor to speak at the school because not only Joseph Hargrove, but his brother.
Yeah, Lane
Hargrove.
Lane was killed, I think, about 3 months after he arrived in Vietnam. Lane was in the Army.
Yes. And then we spoke also at a school in McGee's Crossroads. We spoke all day there to probably over 300 students.
Yeah.
Kept going, and we also spoke at a school in Orange County, the private school, charter school.
Charter school, yeah.
The Woods Charter School. We spoke to the English class, and we talked about the book, the things they carried, and brought it up to speed. But one of our prize speeches this past month was Green Hope High School. We met a very, very interesting young teacher named John Reese. I know he certainly impressed you, didn't he, Bill?
He did. He was really enthusiastic. It rubbed off on his students. They just seemed to really respect him. He was well prepared for the course, knew what he was talking about. He is not a Vietnam vet, but he is a veteran.
Yes, he is.
So he has that a little bit behind him, but he was enthusiastic and had a fantastic class. They had lots of good questions and so forth.
You know, it's really interesting when you meet a good teacher and you look at each other, you know right away. He gets it. He simply gets it. He was great.
You know, Bob, another thing I want to bring up tonight, it's been kind of on my mind lately, the wannabes out there. You know, it's amazing. A little less than 3 million people served in Vietnam, yet the last census said there was 13 million people who claimed to be Vietnam vets. They could have gone in my place. I mean, if they wanted to be Vietnam vets that much, you know, a lot of those people had to be out there carrying signs, protesting, and so forth. Now they claim to be a Vietnam vets, and if that's what they want, fine. But a lot of men, 58,200 and some men died, and women died in Vietnam, and it just irritates me that people get up and claim to be Vietnam vets and won all these awards and so forth, and never did. It just galls me that the people have got enough. I don't even work the word guts. It just no respect whatsoever to people who did serve and paid a price for it to get up and claim things. It's amazing, you know, on Facebook, I'm on a lot of the Vietnam veteran sites, and it's amazing some of the pictures they have of people wearing medals. They have Marine medals, Air Force medals, Army medals that they've won, supposedly, and uniforms. I don't know where they come up with the uniforms. But it's amazing to me how many people who claim to be Vietnam vets who probably couldn't find it on the map.
It's amazing how believable they are. They've done their homework. They wear the medals, maybe out of order. They know the story. But over the years, we have developed a fairly foolproof method of finding out when they're phonies. It usually works. But I agree with you to this day. I cannot see why how they can shave in the morning.
Couldn't it be because the real vets are staying low because of the way that they were treated when they came to this country? They don't talk about it. They don't want to mention Some do. I'm not saying.
I know.
But a lot of them probably don't. And these guys have no problem flaunting it.
Well, I think the thing
You're
about
right,
it is
yeah.
a lot of vets came back and went in the closet or whatever and didn't talk about being a vet and didn't read about being vets. Where these guys have read all the books, they know the vernacular, they
Yeah,
know
you're right.
things that a lot of vets don't know who were there, because when you were there as a Vietnam vet, you had tunnel vision. You saw where you were that day, and your job was to get through that day, and you didn't see the big picture. And these guys have read all these books, and they're probably got more knowledge of Vietnam War overall than some of the Vietnam vets that were there because of that. And
Well,
it's getting harder and harder.
That's a very good point, Hamza. But most Vietnam veterans do not challenge other Vietnam veterans. You see it, you thank them, you agree with it, but when you find out, you pause.
Yeah.
You pause and say, why? What makes a man or woman go to such great lengths to be liked and be respected?
You know, we had a guy, we do our ceremony the first Saturday every month for right at 28 years now down at the state capitol here in Raleigh. And we had a guy came up to claim to be, he had a DD-214 which shows that you were in the service and supposedly your medals and so forth.
Yeah, your whole record and everything.
He had a DD-214 showing he was a Marine, he was a POW. And it was very convincing to us, but the Marine Corps League checked him out, and he was a Vietnam vet, but he was in the Army and he never was a POW. And we just recently had one of a man that we all respected and thought a lot of. We just found out that he was kind of stretching the truth a bit.
I'd say.
We require to join our organization because of our tax status and so forth as a nonprofit veterans organization. A full member in our organization requires a DD-214. And somehow or another, this individual slipped through the crack without turning in a DD-214. When we asked him for one, we were told, "Oh, we're all buddies. We don't need that sort of stuff." And then some investigating has been done, and couldn't find out some really disturbing things. And it's still just, the wannabes out there are just crazy. People are using it for all kinds of things. Politicians have a tendency to claim all this Vietnam veteran status. We came home, we were baby killers and crazy people and drug addicts, and now people want to be us.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to be a Vietnam vet. It's pretty cool. Okay, go ahead.
I would have been glad to let them take my place. To bring you up now to the symposium, and we're probably not going to finish all of it tonight. Next show will do that. But in the beginning, I make a comment about all the people, audience there. It was full house about the ice and snow. We had the symposium scheduled twice before, and in both times it was canceled or delayed due to ice and snow on the ground. Now, we don't get a whole lot of ice and snow here normally like that, but for twice we had it scheduled and it was there. When we had it, it was nice and warm and beautiful outside, but the comment was made about thank you for going through the snow and ice to get here, because this was our third attempt at it. So I'm going to turn it over to our producer, director, technician, Mr. Everything, Amnon Nissan, to start us with the symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started at 7 o'clock someplace. I really appreciate all y'all coming through the snow and sleet to get here tonight. We had the road scraped and iced and sand just for y'all so y'all could get here tonight. Been looking forward to this for quite some time now. We've got 3 very special gentlemen up here and a very special young lady. Colonel Hein Vo speaks English, but he wants to get into his story, and he felt he would be better served to be able to do it in Vietnamese and let her tell us what he's saying. So that's the reason we have the beautiful young lady up here with us, all these old guys up on the stage. And so we appreciate y'all coming out and enjoying us. We just finished, I feel like I've spent more time at this museum now than we have spent in other places. We were here last weekend, or it seems like last weekend, or yesterday is what it seems like. We did a 3-day play, exhibits and so forth. If you missed Etchings in Stone by Ron Harris, You missed a great performance. The reason Cindy was applauding, she was applauding her part in the play.
I saw on film that night.
Someday we're going to get a chance to see this play, Cindy, hopefully. Those of us who were in it, we were all locked up in a room. Some of us need to be locked up more often, but we were locked up in a room and never did get a chance to see the play. But the museum has already asked for us to do it next year. I don't know who Ron's going to get to be actors and so forth next time, but because I think he's got this one on his own. But he'll find some crazy veterans to stand up and do it. At this time, I'm going to ask for the color guard to present the colors. Would you all rise, please? Present the colors. And at this time, I'd like to call on the President of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, Mr. Ange Carmen, to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ange. Retire the colors, please. We're very fortunate tonight. Our color guard are former ARVN military who represent now the United States Army Veteran Support Command, who Colonel Hanbo is the leader here. It's about 17,000 Vietnamese live in this area, and we found it very fortunate, North Carolina Vietnam veterans, to be able to do a lot of things with these guys that who fought for their country, and that's what we're here tonight. Here's one of story of what happened after the fall of Saigon and so forth. So, the United States Army Veteran Support Command. We have, y'all be seated, please. We have a very, like I said, we have a very distinguished panel tonight. We have Mr. Bill Schutte down here on the end, who's going hippie on us with his, either that, he's trying to look like Ho Chi Minh, I'm not certain. Brigadier General Norman Gaddis, and Colonel Hein Vo, and Miss Vicki Lamb, the interpreter for us, who has a son at Athens Drive High School, which is one of the locations of our Lessons of Vietnam course. I saw some students here from that a while ago, and I think I saw some students from Cary High School. I did see the teacher, Russell Page of Lessons of Vietnam at Cary High School with his wife that outranks him. I always have to say that, Russell. I think she was a major and he was a captain. Kind of like real life, isn't it? And but I want to make it, since this show is dealing with POWs and so forth, I want to announce that the first Saturday of every month for this next month will be 28 years, we have met across the street at the Capitol, and we've called out the names of the people from North Carolina who are still missing. We started out with 65 names. As of last weekend, we're now down to 40. Bunyan Durant Price came home March 29th and his remains were buried in Gastonia this past Monday. And in June, Edward Morgan's remains will be coming home to Salisbury, so we'll be down to 39. POWs, MIAs who are still unaccounted for from North Carolina. We welcome you to come over anytime and join us the first Saturday at 12 o'clock noon. We're also going to be there for a special thing, the 175th anniversary of the Capitol, which is going to be in June. I don't remember the date, but it'll be in the paper. We'll be over there for that also. So we're always over there. We invite you to come read the names. If you're an organization, let us know, and we'll have your organization do the names. I'll give you an example. This next ceremony, which is coming up next month, American Legion 539 out of Newbern are driving up to just to have the opportunity to call out the 39 or 40 names. So you're welcome to come at any time. I also want to announce something else we have. NCV, North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, has been working on education and the myths of Vietnam. You know that we're all supposed to be baby-killing drug addicts and crazy people. That's one of the many myths of Vietnam. So we have had this course called The Lessons of Vietnam. Bob Matthews started at Enloe High School 20 years ago, I believe it is now. And we're in about 1,200 schools nationwide. We even got the course going in Vietnam. But and added to that, Amnon Nissan, which is one of our auxiliary members, he was in the 6-day war. He tells us the war was only lasted 6 days because that was the only long as the lease of the tanks were. So, but we do a show twice a month, the second and fourth Wednesday, called The Lessons of Vietnam. It's a streaming show. You can watch it on your computer. It goes all over the world. We've had some great guests. In fact, Norman and Bill both have been on the show. Bill's wife has been on the show. She was very big with Norman's wife in the League of Families. But instructions on how to do it, basically you go to ncvi.org and go to On Demand, and you can see some of the past shows, or we'll be doing new shows each, like I said, the second and fourth Wednesdays at 8 o'clock at night. If you have some ideas for shows, see me or Bob Matthews or any of the Vietnam veterans and give us an idea for a show. If you would like to be a guest, give us one of us, let us know. We'd love to have you on as a guest for the show. Call in, ask questions to the guests and so forth. So I've got some of these out front for you to pick up. Now the format tonight is we're going to give each of our guests about 25 minutes to talk and tell you their story. Now, when we go through all three of them, then we're going to open up for questions from the audience. So if you've got a question, get the person next to you to remember your question so you won't forget it. And then when we get through, we'll have two Vietnam vets who will have microphones, and they will hand the microphone to you and let you do your questions, answers, and so forth. So I hope everybody enjoys the night. I'm looking forward to it. And without further ado, I want to start out with Mr. Bill Schutte. And Bill, thank you for being here tonight. And let's see, some people may not, everybody's going to have to move up close to their mic. Joel has got, so we can make sure we hear all of you. Bill, your helmet ended up in a funny place. Can you start out by telling us a little bit about where your helmet, and was it while you were still a prisoner of war, or was it afterwards? Or tell us a little bit about your helmet and where it showed up.
Well, that was the mystery. Believe it or not, my helmet from when I ejected over North Vietnam ended up in the Russian Army Museum in Moscow. and when you see my name, T-S-C-H-U-D-Y, some people suggested that maybe I had been taken to Russia, and they took my hard hat with me, but I think they just took the hard hat because it looked a little bit Russian. and the whole time, I don't know when it got up there, but every time someone from the United States went to Moscow, they would report back to the State Department that there was a hard hat and it had Lieutenant J.G. William Schutte on it, and we'd say, fine, that was it. And when I was working in the Pentagon, they even reported to me then. So I don't know whether it's still there or not, but anyway, in case you go, let me know. It's there.
Yeah. Bill, you started out your military career in the United States Misguided Children. Some people call it the Marine Corps.
Well, you're treading on very tender feet there. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Yes, way back when we had selective service, and some of us were obliged to comply with the selective service rules, I found out I was getting pretty hot. And I was in college, and when I graduated, I was getting really hot. And so I went down to the Air Force, and because friends of mine said that the Air Force was looking for reserve people. And I went in and I talked to them, and they said, "Oh, this is wonderful." I said, "Well, I want to fly." And they said, "Oh, we couldn't ask for any more than that." And I said, "But you know, right now, if you haven't had your military service out of the way, nobody would hire you, because they didn't want you to suddenly get up and leave for a couple of years and that sort of thing." So the idea was to get the active duty over right away. So I went to the Air Force, and they said, "Now, well, I tell you what, in 2 years, oh, that's okay." That's a message from Mars. So they said, well, it would be 2 years. And I said, I can't do 2 years. And they said, why don't you, I was at NAS Dallas at the time, and they said, why don't you go across the lake there and talk to our Navy friends? So I went in and talked to the Navy, and I said, do you have a 2-year, do you have a 6-month active duty, 6 years reserve program? And they said, no, you come with us, and you're with us for 4 years. And I said, oh, this is not good. And they said, however, we have our cousins right down the hall here, or passageway, if you'd like. So I went down there, and lo and behold, I caught all these guys off guard, because I walked in and I said, I want to join the Marine Corps Reserve. And let me tell you, that was such a wonderful thing. I never had such a gracious welcome. So anyway, I joined the Marine Corps Reserve and went on active duty in Parris Island on July 11th. So I figured, when they always say, if you've been to Parris Island, or if you've been through boot camp, you're a Marine and you'll always be a Marine. And I figured out that when I went, and it was July, and it was in Parris Island, South Carolina, by God, I'm a Marine. And so I served in the Marine Corps Reserve then for a couple of years, until all of a sudden the Berlin crisis occurred. And I said, well, it's time to get in and be a part of it. So I submitted my request to fly. And the Marine Corps said, well, you can fly if you go to Quantico, and then if they think that there's room for you, they might send you to Pensacola to learn to fly. And I said, well, I just found out that the Navy will take me right down to Pensacola and commission me, and then teach me how to fly. So I think I'll go that way. So, and for those of you who've been in the military, you'll catch this. So as I signed out of the Marine Corps, I had to fill out my checklist and go to see each of the departments and so on. And I got to my first sergeant, and he said, so you want to get out of the Marine Corps to go in the Navy? I said, yes. And he said, and so what are they going to do? I said, well, I'm going to fly. He said, you could have flown in the Marine Corps. And I said, well, yeah, but this is a little better. And so then he said, but what you're going to be an ensign? And I said, yeah. He says, good Lord, man, you're a Lance Corporal now. So as you can see, parity is not something that we always enjoy between the Navy and the Marine Corps. So anyway, that's when I went on active duty, and then I did go through through Pensacola. I had the same drill instructors that I did at Parris Island. So it was a little redundant there. But I was assigned as a navigator, a naval flight officer, and which wasn't a pilot, but it's a navigator and all that sort of thing. And so they assigned me to the brand new airplane, the A6A Intruder, and this was really new. There weren't any active duty squadrons until until I and several other people joined up at Navy Oceana, and that's where the training squadron was. And so we joined the training squadron, and when I reported in like a good ensign, having rushed up from Corpus Christi where I'd gone through navigator training, I checked in with VA 42 up in Oceana, and the check-in officer said, "Well, you're a little early, aren't you?" And I, being a good ensign, I said, "Well, they told us that if we checked in before 9 o'clock, it wouldn't be counted as a day of travel or vacation." And he said, no, I mean, we don't have the airplanes yet. So the first year of my adventuresome naval career was at Oceana, and we flew in the back of A-1 prop airplanes, and we waited for the classy super colossal. In our day, we called it the Buck Rogers plane. A lot of people now don't know who Buck Rogers was, but that's what it was. It was an airplane that was designed specifically for the delivery of nuclear weapons, and it was designed so that it could do it without having any contact with any kind of control organization. We had a inertial navigation system, which you find in all the airplanes now, but ours was the very first one. And with that, we could always tell where we were, and we didn't need anybody to tell us. We had all kinds of radar that told us, that identified positions on the ground that we knew the coordinates of, and so we knew where we were all the time. And that's why they decided that this airplane was really a good one for combat in South Vietnam, because we were low and slow, and we had radar that was extraordinary in being able to see slow-moving equipment. Anything that moved 4.5 miles or faster, we could see on our radar. And so the whole idea was get these airplanes in there, and anybody who's crawling around under the jungle canopy would be seen by the A6, and we could take care of them. So that was a wonderful thing, and so they took our ship and they outfitted it to carry our squadron, and they said, "We want to get this airplane over to Vietnam before the combat is over so that we know how it operates in combat." Well, that was in 1965, and and they just retired the last A6 about 10 years ago. So anyway, that was how we got to Vietnam. It's a two-man airplane, and I had a pilot, and then I was a radar operator and a bombardier. And the whole idea is we could tell the pilot where to go by using our radar and knowing what our targets were and so on. So it was very exciting at the time. The pilot had a VGR right in front of him that we called the highway in the sky. Wherever I pointed the radar, it would show him to follow that, and he'd take it right to him. So it was indeed Buck Rogers. Unfortunately, the Vietnamese didn't know what it was, and when I was shot down, they thought I was in a Phantom, an F-4, and so they told me that I was in a two-man Navy airplane, and it had to have been a Phantom. And I said, well, whatever you say. So 2 days later, they dragged me out of my cell and whopped me around with a rifle butt and said, "You lied to us." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, you told us you were in a Phantom F-4, but you were really in an A-6. And I said, "Well, you're the ones who told me." And they said, "You lied to us. That was very bad. And besides that, we know that your wife and son are living in Oceana, and that Jerry Denton, who was your pilot, he and his wife and their 7 children are also living in Virginia Beach, and so we know all about you." That takes a little bit of the wind out of you when people say name, rank, serial number, and date of birth is all you have to tell somebody when they know a lot more than you do. And so there we knew that our friends in Stars and Stripes, who had published that, were happy to help our enemy along with it. But the Vietnamese were very propaganda-oriented. Lenin said you can have one bullet kills one man, but one word can start a revolution, and he was absolutely right. That's what they were looking for from us. One of them told me, we're not going to make communists out of you because you have more material things than we could ever give you. I promise you, what we want to do is tell you our story and why you are aggressors and why you should leave us alone. And so they didn't put us through the same things that the people in Korea had gone through, the brainwashing and all that sort of thing. And in Korea, there were hundreds of POWs that had been captured, ground troops. In North Vietnam, of course, there were only the people who flew over North Vietnam and were shot down or otherwise had to bail out over the country. And so we didn't have the massive numbers. And so they decided they were going to do it different from the North Koreans. So they put us in prison and kept us in groups of one. And they avoided having these massive groups of people sitting around listening to weird music and so on. And so it was, we were put in there, and it was a little hard to figure out. Jerry Denton and I were scared to death because we were in this brand new airplane. I mean, it was new, and just, it had all kinds of gadgets in it that hadn't been in airplanes before, and we both knew that as we were sailing down in our parachutes, that they were really going to get after us and ask us for the information. And I was happy to say that they never asked me anything about the airplane for 2 years, and because they were more interested in the fact that we had flown off of USS Independence, and Mr. McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, was on board our ship that day. And they wanted to know what he had to do with our mission. Did he pick the target? Did he fly? I said, no, he didn't fly because we don't let civilians fly military aircraft. Oh, well, then he must have done something else to make this come off. Well, what he did was, because he was on board the ship, they moved the ship 90 miles south of where it was supposed to be. and so our launch point was a little bit late and all that sort of thing. And you could go back and say, well, we wouldn't have been there when the bullets went off if McNamara hadn't been on board the ship, and so on. So anyway, we learned very early that propaganda was indeed the thing that they were most interested in on us. They wanted us to confess to war crimes. They wanted us to confess to killing men, women, old people, and children in the North. That we had no regard for life or limb, and that we were pirates, and we had invaded the. I can't even think of the word now anymore. The area of North Vietnam. We had invaded their airspace, and this was not good, and we were called criminals. And we'd say, no, we're prisoners of war, and they'd say, no, you're criminals of war. And that's interesting because it took about 7.5 years until the war was just about over, and they wanted all of us to change our written confessions from saying, I'm a criminal of war, to I'm a prisoner of war, and because that would have gone over better. We were, without doubt, a commercial value to them. And that's why there was a book that was published early on called They Wouldn't Let Us Die. And no matter what they did to us, they generally didn't let us die, although there were some people who did not make it through. And we're not quite sure why not, but anyway. But they realized that we were an economic value. And that's a little hard to sit around and be starved to death or be beaten around and say, oh, well, that's all right, I'm an economic value. I will tell you one thing. They did what we call torture, and it was what anybody else would call torture, except a Vietnamese officer told me, he said, no, this is not torture. Torture is cutting off your head or your hand. And so I said, well, I guess definitions vary across the ocean. But it was very, very easy for them. We didn't speak Vietnamese, and they spoke poor English. In fact, I observed one day that I could communicate better with the guards who didn't speak English than I could with the enlisted men who spoke English. Because it's easy to talk with your hands and get the idea across, but oh my, if you don't understand the words. And then the other thing was they had crash courses in English for their people, and they used British dictionaries. So, so sometimes they would come up with something and we would have no idea what they were talking about. And then we would find out, oh, they're talking about merry-go-rounds or something like that. So anyway, they did torture. And they tortured for the very purpose of getting propaganda, and it was always a threat that if you got caught breaking the camp rules or communicating or trying to escape or trying to do anything, you would be taken into a regime of torture until you finally agreed, and it always was the same thing. It was to write some propaganda so that they could see the Americans, they're sorry for what they did, and so on. And so one of the things you always did, no matter whether you're on the very short end of a very sticky stick or what, is you want to have a victory or two. And so your victory was, okay, I'll write this, and then you'd say, I promise I will not get caught talking to my neighbor again. If they didn't catch that, get caught. And you would say all kinds of things that gave you some sort of uplift, but it didn't mean anything. And we said we either wrote it ourselves or in pidgin English, because we'd say we don't know what you want us to write. And so they would quote to us, and then we would write, and it would be in pidgin English, and we'd say, that's great, because when it's exposed to the world, anybody who speaks English anyway will realize that this is an abortion of English. But really the truth was, whoever translated it from English into Vietnamese, I used to say translated into Shakespearean Vietnamese, you know, it was just beautiful, and we spoke with great flowery words and so on. So that's kind of torture went on for, well, I got there in '65. There were 12 people who were already captured, and Jerry Denton and I were number 13 and 14, and so because he was senior, I said, okay, you're number 13, and I'll be 14. Well, unfortunately for us, one of the earlier fellows died, and so Jerry suddenly became 12, and I was 13. But those numbers played around in our lives quite a bit, because I was on my 13th mission when we were shot down, and Jerry was on his 12th. So 12 and 13 figured into this thing pretty prominently, and it didn't make any difference. And then we were released on the 12th of April, the 12th of February. So that was a good day. So you can't ever tell. I'm afraid that numbers were a little, they're not always cleverly predictable. One of the things just in being in surviving day to day, it's you took one day at a time. If you projected farther than one day, you were probably going to be in trouble, because you couldn't predict, you couldn't guess. And the Vietnamese were, you know, people all saw this Hogan's Hero, where everybody was a buddy and all this sort of stuff. That didn't work up north. And the Vietnamese were not interested in, well, they were kind of what we used to call the push-button communist brain. One day you'd hear them all standing around cheering and carrying on. The next day they would just be assholes about everything, beating people up and so on. And then the next day they'd say to you, why don't you go outside? And say, you don't let us outside. Well, you have only to ask. You know, real dumb stuff like that. But one of the things that you had to do personally is you had to keep yourself physically fit. And so a lot of us did exercises. That's why you see all these pictures of guys who go to prison. They come out bulgy with muscles, because that's what you do to pass time. And you want to keep yourself spiritually motivated. And whatever your spiritual motivation is, it's very important to you. And of course, you want to be healthy, so you eat whatever is there and you eat it well. And then the other thing you want is a positive attitude. And what I used to say, and I say to everyone here, is what you look for was a victory. Every day, a victory. And victories were little. They were things like waking up in the morning. By God, here I am. I'm not dead like I thought I could be. Or if the food was better, then that was some sort of victory. If you didn't suffer in some way, or if you attained some sort of objective, those were victories. And I used to say you make a differentiation between blessings, which are things that God gives you. They are things you don't have control over. But victories are things that you control. And it works not only in prison camps, but it works every day in your life and every day in the lives of all our military men and so on. Everything they do is a victory. And if it's not a victory, they know how to make it a victory. And that's important because that keeps your morale up. And then we always had, I got to tell you this, I don't know what you're going to say, but we had people who were gastropoliticians. And a gastropolitician is someone who decides how good the politics are based on the food you eat. And if you get good food, you say, aha, they're losing, they're trying to fatten us up. And if they didn't have good food, you'd say, aha, they're losing, they don't have any supplies. So, they didn't have a chance. But it was a terrible situation to be sitting there day after day, and you had to realize what's going to happen today, and when's it going to be over? And some people would say, well, I'm very realistic and it's not going to be over for a couple of years. And other people would say, well, I'm very optimistic and I'm sure it's going to be soon. And so I finally decided that 6 months from tomorrow, I'm going to be home. And tomorrow kept coming, and 6 months lapse was always there. And by God, one day that 6 months shriveled down. And then we were home. I will tell you one thing, when they gathered us all together and told us that we were going home, they had us all standing in military formation, which we had never done before. They didn't let us use rank. They didn't let us use virtually names. They gave us Vietnamese names. I mean, they were very controlling. And the day that they got us all together and we stood in military formation, and they said that there had been an agreement made in Paris, at the Paris talks, and that we were going to be released. And instead of having a wild yay and all this sort of things like you would expect, it was dead quiet, because we didn't trust them. They didn't do anything to make us trust them. And so we thought, we'll see the day, when the day comes, that's the day it'll be. And so I don't know if they were disappointed or not, but we weren't, because we said, there have been so many times when we've thought things were going to be good, and they turned out not to be. And without stealing any thunder, I will tell you that the first day we were relieved, some of us were released. They took us to the airport, Gelam Airport, and there were about 60 of us, I think, and we were going to go out to the Philippine Islands on big C-141s, airplanes that were so big, I'd never seen anything like that. And so they took us to a holding place, and we sat there, and the morning went by, and nothing happened. And then the afternoon came, and nothing happened. We said, this is another one of these things that all of a sudden it's going to be evening time, and they're going to say, well, I guess they don't want you to come home, so get back in the buses. We're going to take you to Hanoi. And fortunately, that wasn't what happened, because the planes had been held up because of the weather. But let me tell you, right up to the very end, we doubted. And it wasn't until, as we say, wheels up, that the place went wild. And that was pretty much the excitement of coming home. And we went to the Philippines, and then we scattered from there. And I'll tell, General. He can tell you what it's like to really come home.
Bill, where you were over North Vietnam when you were shot down.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Now, everybody knows Hanoi Hilton, and I think that was the only place there. You were several places.
Well, yeah, the Hanoi Hilton was the big French prison that was built in downtown Hanoi, and it was where we were taken first of all. Now, mind you, I want to put it in proper perspective. Anything that was bad in North Vietnam was done by the French. Anything that was good was done by the party. So the French had made this big prison that we all went to. And then after that, they spread us out, depending as people more people were captured, they opened more prisons and moved us in groups, usually about 35 or 40. And so we were in different places from time to time. We didn't understand anything, but the one thing you did understand was it was a bureaucracy. It was a bureaucracy like any bureaucracy you've ever seen. They'd tell us, we don't want you to speak Vietnamese. And then the next day or so, you'd have somebody come in and says, let me teach you some Vietnamese. And so they would teach you some Vietnamese. And the next day, a guy would come in, how you know that? You know, and you're like, oh, that's and so it was that kind of thing that, and then all of a sudden, we'd move, and things happen for reasons you have no idea what went through anybody's mind. One time they took all the Protestants and moved them into one camp and all the Catholics into another camp except for two guys, and they were in the Protestant camp. And then they started switching some people around. Well, that brought the news from one camp to another, and it was amazing. I don't know, maybe they thought this was in the book, how to do it, how to do it. So it was an exciting adventure, and it was more exciting coming home, as you can imagine. And take it away, General.
Yeah. Bill, I got a couple more questions for you. The United States put together a rescue team, and they went into North Vietnam to rescue the soldiers, or the POWs. Unfortunately, when they got there, there was nobody there. That was Song Tay. Bill, why was nobody there at Song Tay?
Well, Song Tay was a small camp that the French had built. So it ran out of water. There's a little stream that went by it, but it was they just had no water. Their wells wouldn't produce water, and when they did get water out, it was 95% silt and so on. So they just had to get us out of there because there wasn't anything, and so they moved us. And now in the camp at Son Tay, there were two buildings where prisoners were kept, and there were two small houses that were called wash houses. They didn't let us out to do anything. We didn't play volleyball. We didn't walk around and spell out POW in the grass or anything like that. We were inside all the time. But when we did go to this wash house, and we'd go down a path, and the other building would go down there too. After they moved us out, as I used to say, this was the only benevolent thing they did the whole time we were there, was move us away so we could have water. After they moved us out, Army people were allegedly put into this camp, not as prisoners, but just as an Army supply place, and they lived in these cells that we had been in, and so they walked to the wash house and walked back and did exactly the same. So a reconnaissance aircraft flying over didn't see any change over the time, and so that's why we weren't there when the fellows from Fort Bragg came in. And let me tell you, that was good news to us, and that was bad news to the Vietnamese, because Americans had set their feet on Vietnamese soil. And let me tell you, that created more trauma among the Vietnamese than you could ever imagine. I'll tell you just one thing. The Americans were carpet bombing the DMZ all the time. They were carpet bombing. And the Vietnamese radio would always say, we stand behind the valiant people of Ben Hoa who are being carpet bombed by the Americans. It's a daring thing. We're behind you all the way. Well, let me tell you, when the first bomb dropped in North Vietnam, all of a sudden that was horrible. And they really felt the war was getting close to them. And it could have been nice if it had, but anyway. So that's why we weren't at Son Tay. But say it was too bad.
Bill, I have one more question for you. While you were captured as a Navy pilot or navigator, did you ever say to yourself, darn, I should have stayed a Marine?
No, but I will tell you this. It wasn't with a Marine. When we were released over to Clark Air Force Base, they brought the POWs from both the North and the South. And you all had heard about the POWs in the South who were kept in tiger cages and in the jungle. I mean, their conditions were unbelievably horrible. And one of the fellows, whose name I can't recall today, but who was a very active prisoner, American prisoner. And I was talking with him. He said, boy, I'll tell you, I said, you guys who fly, holy cow, is that terrible? He said, I just can't imagine anybody getting up in an airplane and flying around. And I said, and you think that you're walking through the jungle, stepping on mines and being shot by the enemy was easier? Oh, yeah. He said, because we know what was going on. So I guess this tells you that you ought to be schooled in your own profession.
Bill, I have one more thing. You have a special guest here with you tonight, I believe. You have a special guest from another state, California or someplace?
Why, yes, I do. My favorite daughter is here, and she's Nancy. She was born after we came back from Vietnam. She doesn't like this when I tell it that when we came back from Vietnam, there were a large number of children born. And they were generally referred to as our freedom babies. And so I was in graduate school in Philadelphia, and it was time for Nancy to make an appearance. Her mother said, you know, Mike, who is our son, who was born before I left, she said, we've been through this whole thing together, and he knows what's happened to his dad and all this, and that's all past, and now here's this new little creature that's coming into our lives and so on. And so Nancy held off for 2 weeks and was born at high noon on the 4th of July in Philadelphia.
Thank you, Bill. Norman?
That was great.
Well, okay, thank you for tuning in. We'll get the next part, Norman Gaddis, our next show, but I want to take a few minutes. Mr. Bob Matthews, our reader, scholar, has a couple of books he wants to tell you about, really good books. If you want to know more about Vietnam, if you're a Vietnam veteran or just interested in Vietnam, there's some great books out there now. And Bob wants to tell you about a couple that he has read recently.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Bob.
Okay, each week or each show, I like to recommend a couple of novels because it's becoming a national, I guess you'll say, a trend. A lot of Vietnam veterans, the way they're dealing with PTSD and their story is they're writing it down. Can you imagine that? They're writing their story down and they're calling it a book. The first one is by a foot soldier named Mark Rubenstein. It's actually called The Foot Soldier. It was called a novella. It's a small little book. Read it in about maybe 7 cups of coffee. But it's very nice, very interesting. This is the first one I'd like to recommend tonight. The second book I'd like to recommend is wonderful. This book is called Cherries, a Vietnam War novel. It deals with the rookies in Vietnam, affectionately known as cherries in Vietnam, didn't know anything. It's by a man we hope will be on our show later. His name is John Podolsky. Bill's friends with him now on Facebook. But these are your last 2 books I'd like to recommend. And we'll do this each week, or at least once a month, so we can build up your library. These are available very, very cheap on Amazon.com. In fact, this book right here was $1. $1. I got a book for a penny the other day. So keep looking, keep reading, keep asking good questions. Bill?
Well, Bob, those good books. The one that I'm working on right now, I'm working on reading two different ones. This Time We Win was basically the story of Tet, and so far it has been absolutely a fantastic book.
It is great.
I'm looking forward to possibly trying to get that author on the show as well. And we've been sitting here and trying to come up with some ideas for other shows and so forth. And we've got some great things down here on our list. I'm not going to read them to you because we haven't talked to some of the people yet. But good morning, Vietnam. We're working on, that one. I won't mention any names, Adrian, but we hope to have these people on. If you've got someone that's a Vietnam vet, you think it's got a good story to tell, let us know. We'd love to have them on, even if they're in the land of fruits and nuts. We used to call that California.
We still do.
We can do by Skype or whatever. But if you have someone who has a great story, let us know. We'd love to have them on. We've got some really fantastic shows coming up that we're working on right now, putting them all together. So that you'll have somebody besides Bob and I sitting here talking, telling each other stories. We already know each other's story because we've told it so much. We're starting to tell each other's stories. I probably can tell Bob's story as good as he can now, and all he knows about my story is, do you like rice?
I love that story.
But that always gets, and someday I'll even tell y'all about rice. I'll probably have somewhere.
Bill, speaking of inviting people to call in or email us, either way, go on our website, please, and check things out. We'd love some suggestions, because some of the best classes we've taught over the years and some of the best questions is when the students take ownership of the classroom. They go home, they talk to their parents, and the teachers are doing such a good job. They prepare the students. They say, go home and tell your parents, tomorrow in class, you're having 3 Vietnam vets come in. And the parents ask the questions. I can tell right away when the first question is about Jane Fonda. I know that comes from a dad. I say, your dad asked that question. The kid always says, how'd you know? I said, well, I just guessed.
Yeah, the questions are, Jane Fonda always comes up. Somebody somewhere has always prompted some student in the class to ask that question. And,
yeah, they know she's my girlfriend.
But we, every class we spoke in this past month, well, this month I guess,
This month.
we're still in here. Those students have done research and had questions prepared when they came in. And it amazes me, some of the students had never really taken a Vietnam course.
No, they hadn't.
But someone had worked with them and had some great questions. Again, just to bring you up to date a little bit, that we were at Joseph Hargrove's school in Mount Olive, North Carolina. His cousin, Gary Turner. Kerry was in Kong Tung Island in Cambodia while we were in his school.
Yes.
There was the 40th anniversary of the battle there. He had some other Marines there with him for the anniversary, and we hope to have Kerry back on the air to talk a little bit about what they did on the 40th anniversary, meeting some of the other Marines that were there with Joseph and the other 2 gentlemen who, I apologize, I don't remember their names right at the moment. But
well, Bill, the bottom line is, Kerry's title of his book, Bringing Joseph Home, he's about ready to complete the cycle. He's bringing Joseph home. Mm-hmm. He'll be back on the show. He'll tell us. It's a great story. Yeah. A great story.
Thank you for joining in, and looking forward to seeing you the next show.
Thank you very much. Have a good
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet, with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.